Hello and welcome back for episode 27 of the Delve podcast. I'm Allie. I'm a staff therapist here at Delve Psychotherapy of Chicago.
And I'm Adam. I'm the Executive and Clinical Director at Delve Psychotherapy of Chicago.
Help us spread the word with this podcast. We're not trying for fame here. We don't plan to run any ads. We're just trying to add value and be helpful to as many people as possible. So we ask that you please share this podcast with others. Share with at least one other person that you think would find value. Here at Delve, we offer individual, couples, group, and family therapy. So if you're interested in a free consultation call, head on over to delvepsych.com. That's DELVEPSYCH.com. And we also have a Substack where we write a lot of blog posts. Head on over there for some great content at delvepsych.substack.com.
Yeah, I would love if people would continue to engage with the content, not because we care about viewership or listenership or whatever else, but just because we think that this is useful stuff and can really help people out. So please share.
Yeah, really good stuff. All right. So for today, Adam, you were sent this Instagram post by a friend, I believe.
That sounds right. It's been a while, but
It's been a minute.
yeah, I think a friend sent this Instagram along. And also I wanted to say, I feel like we're sort of falling into something of a cadence where I don't know, I'm liking our segments. We've got like a Instagram/media segment. We've got like a Reddit questions segment. And then the other two, we seem to be getting into whatever other psych topic in some form or fashion, or like listener feedback question episode thing. So I'm kind of liking the cadence of that being roughly the four that we do. I don't know. What do you think?
I like it. Yeah, I like kind of moving around from like different topics of conversation. And I think especially like the stuff that we get from the internet, from Instagram, is really relevant.
It feels very close to the populace. It feels very close to the zeitgeist.
Yes. So I like pulling from social media because I mean, this is what's out there. This is what's being disseminated and shared. So might as well look into it and give our takes.
Absolutely. Well, and I find that the responses to things, there's some really good responses from lay people to Reddit questions. There's also quite a few, coaches and therapists that are responding to Instagram content these days. But I think that Delve has a particular mentality and a particular penchant for depth and exploring things in a more kind of nuanced way that I think adds value. And so even when it's been covered before, I really like the way that we think as a unit. I know that the people listening really only get to hear you and I and an occasional guest, but we have several people who think like this in our team, and I really do think that we as a collective are pushing towards something that's really quite valuable.
I totally agree. And we should really get more of the team on here. We should really convince them.
Yeah. I think that I would love to have them on. Not everybody loves to have a mic in their face.
I understand. All right. So this Instagram post is really interesting. So to give credit, this Instagram profile is a man named Graham C. Weaver. He's a businessman and a motivational speaker as well. So the Instagram post is titled 80% of therapy is about one of these 7 questions. And even just like reading the title alone really caught my eye because I'm like, really? Can you boil therapy down to only just 7 questions?
I suspect not, although I wonder if he may be effective in identifying some common questions. I'm also interested in the 80% thing. When people say something like that, I think we can end up getting very caught up in is it exactly 80%? Where did he come up with that number? I'm actually somewhat more comfortable with people saying things like that. I think it's just a heuristic. They're trying to say a majority, right? And they picked a number to describe the idea of a majority, and we could get so persnickety. So I suspect I'm going to have some beef with this post, but probably not that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think he actually did research and found the 80% statistic.
Correct.
So basically, he thinks a majority of therapy is about one of these 7 questions. Well, let's see. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Number 1. Am I enough/lovable? You were never meant to earn your worth. You were born with it. Try to understand where that belief got fractured, and that's the path to healing. Understand you don't have to become someone else to be lovable. Hmm.
It's interesting. That's not a question. I mean, I guess the
Well,
first
am
part
I
is,
enough? Yeah.
but it's much more kind of a statement. It's much more like a commentary, right? So is this a common problem? Yes. Uh, I think it's interesting, this idea of, am I enough and lovable? Yes, you are. At the same time, I think that often gets construed as, therefore, I need to do no work in order to be effective in relationships or effective in finding a romantic partner. So if we are inclusive of that category of thing, you're enough and you're lovable and you can find a partner, and you might have to do some work in order to do so, both in terms of toil but also in terms of emotional labor, then I do think that covers a good chunk of therapeutic thought if we're inclusive of those additional themes.
Mm. Yeah. So 2 things can be true at the same time. It's like, yes, like you as a human are inherently born with worth. And also you can't just rest on your laurels with that, like especially in relationship with someone. You still gotta put in the work and still gotta put in the effort.
Absolutely.
But I do think it's interesting, this idea of like, because I do find clients often struggle with not feeling worthy or not feeling lovable or enough. And I do think it's worth it to explore sort of a psychodynamic perspective in that, exploring their childhood and what sort of messaging maybe they got from like their caretakers on like their lovability. If they had to, maybe they were only lovable if they got an A+ on this test, then their parents showed them love and affection if they earned it, type thing. um
Yeah, and I have a couple of books I want to bring to bear on this conversation as well. One is that book, Selfie, that I talked about in a recent episode, and another is Punished by Rewards. I think a typical parent would probably think nothing of saying something to a child like, "Oh, you're so beautiful," or "We're going to go out for pizza because you got an A." They wouldn't think anything of that. But there's quite a complex and subtle psychology that will really subvert somebody's understanding of what lovability is by doing those kinds of things. Um, if I'm beautiful, I'm complimented for being beautiful, and that's the way that I get your attention and care and affection, then I need to focus on beautiful as a major important thing. So I'm going to try to be beautiful. What happens if suddenly I'm not beautiful? What happens if I doubt my beautifulness? And I would say that kind of comment often ends up being seen in the development of like eating disorders, especially. Um, Alternatively, this idea of you got an A, so we're going out for pizza, means that in order for you can end up getting to a place where, in order to get my attention and time with me, you have to have done something, you have to have achieved something. So where is the connection if I don't get an A? You think about something like grounding. I'm going to ground you because you didn't get an A or a B on your exam. Well, you've now decided that if this person doesn't perform, then they lose social contact. They lose their connections to joy in their lives. It used to be the practice, I don't know if it still is, but when kids would get bad grades, they would lose access to extracurriculars. Oh, you can't be on the track team anymore. Those are my friends. What are you doing? You think that the way that you're going to get somebody to get good grades, which by the way have been massively inflated anyway and have less meaning than they ever did in history. You think the way to get me to have good grades is to isolate me and punish me? to take away my very connection to humanity, that's sort of like you can't stay with us in this cave. You need to go stay in that other cave by yourself. There's bears. I'm scared. Don't put kids in that situation. So you could see some of the progenation of some of these mentalities based on just very subtle decisions that parents might be making without really realizing that they're having a pretty deleterious effect.
I'm not a parent right now, but like even you just talking about this, like, man, I imagine it's so hard being a parent and not subtly giving these sort of messages that could be detrimental to my children long term. Like what if I do care though that my kids get good grades? And am I not allowed to call my child beautiful if I think they look beautiful? Like, like I don't want to mess them up for life.
There's a few things there as well. Hot take, you're gonna fuck up your kids. Sorry. Every parent is gonna fuck up their kids. And also, being a parent, your children are going to be witness to all of your bad days and all of your worst traits. They will remember them, they will be affected by them, and they will maybe hold it against you for the rest of your life. So parenthood. You can't be that intimately connected to another human in a parent-child relationship and not have effects, both positive and negative. So the goal isn't to try to avoid anything that would ever send anyone down any of these paths ever. It's to be a consistent, warm, positive, seeing force in their life overall. If you know what direction they can go, or you know what their general options are, then you encourage them in those directions. And above all else, maintain warmth. I was talking to a parent recently about their kid that sometimes just kind of like almost performatively loses their cool. They don't get their way and they start to lose their cool. And one of the things the parent was doing was just saying like, well, whenever you're done crying, just let me know and we'll come play again, which isn't that bad, right? Like it's if you can kind of get your emotions together, then I'm still here for you. But there's a conditional there. If you get your emotions together, then I am available. Ugh. So what I encouraged him to do instead was, if at all possible, stay put. Like stay there, but you don't necessarily have to comfort. You don't have to necessarily correct. You don't have to try to get them to stop crying. So I suggested, like, if the kid's laying on the ground crying, can you just lay on the ground and sit with them? Like, just be with them. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. If they roll over and hug you, you can hug them. But you don't have to coddle and comfort and save them from their emotions. You're just there if they're having emotions. You're just there. And then if they want to start playing again, you're there for that too. The there-ness of it is so powerful, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And then it doesn't send the message that like emotions are bad or need to be like tampered down or controlled in order to like have the outcome that they want.
Yeah. And also, I will say, I was talking with a parent somewhat recently, and they every so often kind of get a little bit irritated with their kid in a way that the kid probably recognizes, right? Johnny, can you just put the pots away? That kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Or messaging, if you will, that tone. I taught him to apologize to his kid, and the kid probably doesn't understand the apology. In fact, some of the times when he apologizes to the kid, he's like, I didn't like the way that I was talking to you the other day. The kid's just like, can I have cheese? Right? Like, they don't
Right.
I don't get what this is. But I think the general air of and the mentality of I didn't like the way that I engaged you, and I'm trying to repair with you, / the kid receiving, my dad's trying to be right with me, right? Like, in a general sense, I can tell that dad's trying to do something right now to be close to me. They'll feel that. They'll be affected by that. And it gives them space to make mistakes. It gives you room to make mistakes, because we'll fix it. We'll fix it in post.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think fair to say, number one, the question of am I enough / lovable? I think Adam and I would agree that yes, that tends to be a trending topic of conversation in therapy and something that we can explore through where did you get that messaging, perhaps from childhood.
I'll also say points to this guy. If we just talked about that one question this much, he might have a point.
All right. So far, he might be on the money. Let's see. Let's see if he's still good. Okay. Number 2. Will I be rejected or betrayed? You learn to expect abandonment. So now you flinch, chase, or shut down before it happens. But not everyone leaves. Part of healing is learning to stay with yourself first so you can stop mistaking anxiety for intuition. Ooh.
I think the majority of that is on point. I do think that selfie book that I meant to mention just a minute ago and missed, I'll mention now, talks a lot about this kind of like stand on your own 2 feet mentality. That is a mentality. That is a philosophy. That is a culturally bounded kind of way of thinking that is particularly pervasive in the US especially, but also other highly individualistic cultures. It's really not the way that you would hear a collectivistic culture talk about these things. And they're not inherently wrong. In fact, it's probably rather stereotypic / prejudiced of us to believe that it is. You wouldn't find somebody from a deeply collectivistic culture saying like, well, you just need to stand on your own 2 feet and handle your shit. It would be you rely on your family, you connect to the people who care about you. We're in this together, we're part of a collective. It takes a village, those kinds of messages would be much more pervasive. So there is an element of, yes, psychology is an individualistic pursuit, and there's one brain walking around trying to figure everything out. But at the same time, the way that a bunch of brains organize themselves into a society is not always this kind of individualistic mentality that seems so obvious to an American, but isn't really the way that other cultures think necessarily. So in terms of the sort of, I don't know, the variance that this occupies, probably it is a large question for people for sure. In terms of the solution set, I got that little caveat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I think about with this is, I think as humans, like we have like a deep innate need of belonging and not wanting to be rejected or betrayed. I think back when we were cavemen, like belonging was a means of survival, right? If we didn't belong to the group, then we probably wouldn't make it.
Absolutely.
So I think about that. This question also makes me think of attachment styles. And I think especially in terms of like avoidant attachment. It says basically like you flinch or you shut down before any sort of abandonment happens, right? It's like self-preservation. So like, I'm gonna keep you at arm's distance. I might even break up with you first to avoid you rejecting me. And then, with the anxious attachment, it's like, please, please, please don't abandon me. I'm going to hang on for dear life. So you don't. So I'm going to chase and chase and chase. So attachment styles also came up for me with this question. And that is another big topic of conversation in therapy. So
absolutely. Yeah. So points to the poster again, the OP again. Will you be rejected? Yes. Sorry, but yes. How do you cope with, I don't like the word cope. How do you respond to your rejection when it happens? Because it will happen. That's valuable.
Yeah. Somebody somewhere will reject you at some point in time. It's going to happen. So how are you going to deal with it?
Right. It could be a job. It could be a friend. It could be a romantic partner. It could be your dog. Hopefully that's not your dog, but if it is.
My cat rejects me all the time.
Well, cats are very, I shouldn't get into it. We're going to polarize our listenership.
All right. So that's number 2. All right. Moving on. Number 3. Let's see. Pretty good. So far, so good. The question is, how do I stay safe or in control? There's probably a time in your life when control gave you a sense of safety because your life felt unpredictable and dangerous. But that response is likely outdated and causing more pain than relief. Safety is built internally, not externally. It's about learning to regulate your emotions, set boundaries, and trust yourself no matter what's happening around you.
So I think that this is a little bit of a cheat because I mean, to some degree, that is therapy, right? Like we're talking about the way that we relate to our own emotionality. So if you define it in such broad terms, then you get to 100% of therapy because we've just defined it in very broad terms. So yeah, sure. I think that the important elements there are I use the term respond to / relate to your emotions rather than regulate them. I think that there's this kind of subtle verbiage in the world of psychology and certainly lay psychology right now that's all about it suggests that we're like controlling these emotions. I have this one and then I do something and then I change that emotion, which I think is a rough way to think about that. I think it suggests that we have more control than we do. I think it's non-responsive to the feelings like overwhelm and exhaustion and defeat, which maybe you can't immediately change just by like changing your thought pattern per se. And even if you can, there's a disingenuousness to doing that. If you sort of convince yourself to not feel existential dread amidst some fairly large forces in the world, then you're probably just playing like logical tricks rather than actually dealing with the real experience that you're really having. And I would much rather say, how can we relate to these emotional experiences, especially in multiple different ways, sometimes to reframe, but sometimes to just sit with an experience and accept. And I think having a variety of options is really the name of the game. So yeah, sure, but also I don't love how this one got defined because it's quite broad.
Yeah, it is pretty broad topic. But again, I do think sitting with clients, there is this idea that often comes up of like, oh man, I like to be in control and I don't like not being in control. And there's so many things out of my control right now, in the world, in the country, what have you. And that makes me feel really anxious and stressed out. Um, so they try as best as they can to, control what is in their purview, what is like in their control, able to be controlled, I guess.
Yeah, you're right to highlight that particular word and that particular motivation. I do think that that individualistic stand on your own 2 feet mentality contributes to this idea of control as well, as if I can have control over all manner of thing. And again, I don't know that all individuals in all cultures would necessarily take that approach. In fact, I think that many cultures have settled on an experience of learned helplessness,
Yeah.
that the large forces around me are just going to put me in this place and I must accept it as it is. So, and I don't know that everybody is necessarily seeking control, but again, if we define it really broadly, then you could imagine a certain kind of control that somebody is trying to uh, identify and retain. Um, so I don't know, I say sort of.
Sort of. Yeah, I also think about like sometimes clients will struggle with like really, really um what's the word? Like their external circumstances really, really have a major effect on how they're feeling about themselves, about their life in general, and in turn, like how they move through the world. And obviously, you get a promotion, you're gonna feel better. Obviously, if something bad happens in your life, it's gonna make you upset. But I think instead of like being this pendulum that just like swings and is carried by whatever externally happens to you, we can work on trying to have like a internal base of like, instead of like the waves going way up and way down, we can kind of stay like in this middle area of like, yeah, I may feel some little ups and little downs, but I'm not going to be completely, my life isn't going to be completely overthrown, and my whole state of being and mental health is going to totally plummet because Jerry said something mean to me today at work or something, you know, I don't know. Like, there's this ACT principle of like, you are the mountain, and like the storms may come. And yeah, there'll be like travelers hiking on your mountain. And maybe some of the path gets worn a little bit. And maybe when there's like some rain and snow, like some trees die on your mountain and everything, but the mountain still stays, and you are the mountain.
Beautiful metaphor, Allie. Well applied. Yeah.
Andrea taught me that one. So, all right, we're gonna move on. Number 4, who am I really? So much of who you've been was shaped by survival and trying to fit in. Roles you had to play, masks you had to wear. Now you get to ask, who are you when you're not performing? Who are you when you're free?
Yeah, I think we're narrativizing here a little bit. I think this comes in the vein of that kind of individualistic self-pursuit identity stuff. If we're saying identity is a major question in psychotherapy, hell yes. If we're saying that this is the way to approach it, I have some quibbles. I think what we lose in our understanding of identity is just how much it is shaped by others. And also, if we're thinking culturally, and I just wrote a Substack about this. It'll be out by the time that that this podcast is aired. But I just wrote about the way that other people shape us. But point 2 is that the ways that roles get assigned in society are a culturally bounded framing. It's part of what defines a culture. So this idea of having to fit into roles, everyone has to fit into roles. What the roles are and how we assign them and what our individual place respective to the assignment process and the manifestation of those roles, that is culturally bounded. So actually, I think the post is already out about the folk ways of culture, essentially the ways that culture kind of gets organized, and role ways, if you will, is a way that we sort of organize culture. How do we decide who has certain kinds of status, and how do we decide how the people of various statuses relate to one another? That preordains that people will have roles in their groups. So the idea of, oh, don't have a role, find your genuine self, that's the hyper individualistic part that comes in the vein of essentially the self-esteem movement that the Selfie book talks all about.
Yes, this makes me think all about like our identity approach at Delve. It's like we don't exist in a vacuum. And I think we have talked about the co-created self on the podcast.
Yeah.
But basically, like, so who am I really without all of these people and things and culture? And it's like, well, how do you just like take away all of those elements? You can't. Now, if you recognize that you're performing a certain way with certain groups of people and you don't like some of the roles that you've taken on, yeah, you can reflect on that. But saying like, who am I really in the absence of like other people and culture and all these other things, it's like, I don't think you can really do that, because like, how do you take away those elements? You can't. Like, I don't know.
Absolutely. So I mean, the framing of this question kind of betrays the assumption of there being a genuine true self. Also, one of the things that psychology knows quite clearly is there is not one self. There are many selves, and many ways of expressing self. And it feels to us, our brain kind of lies to us and gives us this cohesive narrative experience that I am a one thing, and I've been a one thing, and I continue to be that one thing. Even the way that we talk about I kind of betrays that idea. But really, if you look at human behavior, we behave vastly different in very different contexts. Also, in lab settings, the researchers can get you to behave in ways that they choose, which is sort of almost depersonalitizing you. We can the context around us heavily influences the way that we behave.
Yeah.
Even if there are trends there within.
Yeah. So number 4, oh, we have some qualms with that one.
Yeah. But the general idea of identity, for sure. Again, if you define this really
absolutely.
broadly, then sure, we got all of psychology.
Right. Number 5, what does all of this mean? When we start questioning everything, the real journey starts. This is so broad. Okay. At some point, we realize that the meaning of life is to figure out our own meaning of life. We're the only ones who can provide that answer.
Well, now we've got like 80% of philosophy comes down to, because sure, I mean, again, if you define it incredibly broadly, then yes, but meaning making is a huge part of psychotherapy. And we will have questions about our place in the universe and broader systemic issues. To be honest with you, I find that kind of existentialism is a direction that a lot of clients don't go.
Yeah.
But I encourage us to spend more time in. It seems to hurt people's heads. But what I fear is that we are thinking about it passively in the background without talking about it and without really kind of picking it apart, when it would be quite valuable for us to actually pick it apart.
Yeah, no, that was the first thing that I thought when I read this. Number 5 is like this existential approach is all about like life doesn't inherently have meaning, at least in this existential approach. And it's up to you to endow your own life with its own meaning and purpose. And that is what helps whatever our definition of mental well-being is, like having some kind of meaning or purpose to your life and pursuing that. So yeah, I don't know. I this is also not a topic of conversation, I guess, that I typically peruse with clients, but I agree. I do think it's very interesting to kind of ponder like what does this all mean?
Yeah, absolutely. We should do it more.
We should.
There is a branch of psychotherapy called existential psychotherapy. I don't think it's incredibly popular, but it ain't small either. And that kind of existentialism is very valuable. By the way, I'll also take this moment to point out that I think very often, if you're not a terribly existential person, then you're pretty unlikely to pick an existential therapist. And if you're a highly logical person, you're pretty likely to pick somebody that's highly cognitive in their approach. I argue that's the wrong way to go about this. The vast majority of the time, if you're wanting something different in your life, quit picking people that think like you. Pick therapists that think very differently than you. But then I'm going to get into therapy and they're going to have conversations with me that make me really uncomfortable. That's the goal.
That's the goal for therapy. Let's get uncomfortable.
You come to therapy to change. You change through discomfort. So you got to find the right ways to be uncomfortable rather than avoiding discomfort. But I don't want to be uncomfortable. I want puff cookies. You want to change or not?
Yeah. Just on this topic of like meaning making in life, I highly recommend the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's very, very good.
Excellent.
And all right, moving on. Number 6, how do I live with what I lost? You don't heal by erasing the loss. You heal by learning how to let love and sorrow exist at the same time. Grief changes you, and part of the work is allowing yourself to become someone new without betraying the memory of what was. You've been doing some research on grief lately.
Oh, I went to a conference recently, and one of the talks that I went to was on grief. I actually should shout out that presenter. Let me just look this up very quickly because she also has a podcast, and I think she had a very good, progressive, contemporary way of thinking about grief. Let me see if I can find this very quickly. Yeah, so the talk was given by Heather Taylor. She's a psychologist. I don't know where she's out of, but she's where she's coming from. But she focuses on contemporary framings of grief. And she has a podcast. I'm not sure the name of the podcast, but her website is griefisthenewnormal.com. Griefisthenewnormal.com. And I haven't yet listened to the podcast, but I did find myself learning a lot from her CE, if you will, her presentation. Oh, the podcast is Grief is the New Normal podcast with Dr. Heather Taylor. So I would encourage taking a look at some of her content. I thought it was very good, and I learned a lot. I do think that we will all grieve. I don't know for sure that everyone has this particular problem set with grief, the way that the presenter presented it.
Yeah.
And I don't know that everybody necessarily gets stuck on grief in the way that he's describing. So is it a topic that may come up? For sure. Is it one of the major ones in therapy? I suppose it could be for some, but maybe there's certain practices that happen to spend more time on it. I'm not so sure that this is one of the major 7, if you will.
Yeah. There's certainly people that go to therapy to move through grief. Absolutely. But just thinking about my own caseload, I don't know that it's like a huge topic of conversation. What do you think? What was one of the main things that you took away from her presentation?
So the historical view of grief that we often get presented is the idea of the stages of grief. And I think that there's something of an embedded assumption that you will move through those stages in something of a linear fashion. That's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stage model. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a brilliant therapist. Came out of University of Chicago, was here in the city back in the day. And I think her model was popular and useful. I think most people that utilize a Kubler-Ross model these days are going to see those as much more fluid. You may like cycle through them multiple times or something of that nature. But while I haven't memorized them yet, there are a number of alternative contemporary theories that are just a bit more nuanced in the ways that people may grow through grief.
Yeah.
And then I also remember this portion. I won't get the terminology correct because again, this was just the first time taking it in rather than memorizing it. But as a therapeutic approach, the kind of dual process, if you will, of sometimes like grieving what is lost versus building what will become new.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I bet it was kind of called like grief conversation and restorative conversation. And you could imagine in therapy, maybe session 1, you're predominantly in grief land. Session 2, you start some restorative talk. Maybe you stay on that for session 2, 3, 4. Then the client gets really upset about what they've lost again. So sessions 5, 6, 9 end up being much more grief work. The ones in the middle are kind of mixed. And you could sort of see how we could sort of be pushing and pulling based on what the client is giving us. Where am I at? Am I upset about what I'm losing? Or am I trying to build into something new? And I will say that therapists seem to have an extremely difficult time when a client starts to grieve or even just kind of like sit in the swampy soup that is their own morass, their own defeat or something of that nature. We can get very rescue-y very fast. We want to save these people from this. And there is a real skill to, and I have to remind myself to employ this skill quite often. Just stop, just sit, just stay in what's bad and understand it.
Absolutely, which can be really uncomfortable for the therapist, but I think that's what the client needs right now, to just like sit with them in it. Don't rescue them. Because I think we talked about this in an earlier podcast, like trying to rescue them kind of minimizes the depth and of the struggle that they're going through.
Yeah, it's a subtle invalidation on accident, but it's still
Right.
there.
Right. Oh, so interesting. I love that. So number 6, is grief a topic in therapy? Yes, but is it like one of the main 7 things? I don't know.
And maybe in some practices.
Ooh, okay. Number 7. Why do I keep sabotaging myself? Self-sabotage isn't you being lazy or broken. It's a part of you that learned survival through shrinking, delaying, or quitting. It's not trying to ruin your life. It's trying to protect you from a threat that may not exist anymore. Healing means teaching that old part of you that you're safe now.
I take a slightly different approach on this. So self-sabotage, I think of as really kind of what I call the cyclical irony of psychological distress,
Mhm.
which I got from the Handbook of Integrated Psychotherapy that was published back in the 80s. I think it was the first edition. I think of it much more in those terms, where we have a way of recreating our circumstances without realizing that we're doing it. And the way that we end up doing it isn't through those 3 things that he just mentioned, shrinking, what were the other 2?
Shrinking, delaying, or quitting.
We're narrowing the frame too much there. There are a lot of ways in which you can recreate your current circumstances. So that's far too narrow. Those are some ways that some people may do that, but there are many ways that you can end up accidentally recreating your circumstances over and over and over again. What I think really happens is that in any given moment, you have the option to turn the way that you usually turn and do the thing that you usually do, or you have the option to turn all the way away from what you usually do and do something completely different. So you can imagine that there's kind of in statistics we'd call these sample sets. It's really like there's 2 blobs of options, things that seem to us like they are very reasonable to do, and things that seem to us like they're very unreasonable to do. And I'm sitting here at the nexus trying to decide, at the fulcrum trying to decide which direction to go. Do I turn toward the reasonable things or do I turn toward the unreasonable things? Well, why on earth would I make an unreasonable choice? So I'm going to turn toward the reasonable options. But what I view as reasonable is dependent on my existing psychology, which is dependent on my history, which is dependent on my biases, which is dependent on my attachment styles and the relationships that I've been a part of my entire life. So I'm at this fork in the road, and I can turn toward reasonable options. It's reasonable to turn toward reasonable options, but you'll end up tricking yourself accidentally into believing that you're doing something different when really it's just a slight tweak on the same things that you've always already done, because we're still living in that sample set of reasonable options, the things that seem to me very reasonable. I only very slightly tweak my approach and convince myself that it's very different when really it's a slightly different manifestation of the same damn thing. Whereas in the unreasonable option, the sample set that's over on the unreasonable side, there are some really bad ideas over there, and you really probably shouldn't do them. There are some things that if you did that unreasonable thing, it likely will cause a lot of problems. But alternatively, there are some things in that unreasonable sample set that are actually really good ideas that you just psychologically have discarded. And that's kind of what he's getting at here, is that you kind of have to kind of move towards some of the things that feel uncomfortable and unreasonable in my framing in order to find the stuff that is actually new and actually different. So how do you grow? Through discomfort, but also through unreasonable choices.
So maybe not necessarily that like something is actually unreasonable to you. It's more just that it's like unfamiliar, uncharted territory,
I think you're trying to
uncomfortable.
save them. I think you're trying to save them. I think that a person would come to a certain circumstance and actually view the choice that might be presented to them as an unreasonable choice. They will say, that's a bad idea, and call it half. I'm doing the thing he did with the 80%. Half the time it's a terrible idea, and half the time it's actually a really great idea that you just have psychologically discarded.
Right, right. No, I think the client, yeah, legitimately thinks that that idea is unreasonable. But I guess my argument is maybe it's in reality, it's not so much unreasonable. It's just uncomfortable or unfamiliar to them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we talked about this in an earlier podcast episode of like this idea of like, why do I keep, like, maybe one of my girlfriends keeps dating the same sort of emotionally unavailable guys that aren't good for her. And it's like, why do I keep going towards those same guys? Why do I keep doing that? And I don't know, is it really because she thinks that like the other types of men are unreasonable? Or is it just that she like finds comfort in the familiarity of these same sorts of men? Or I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of ways that can happen, and I don't I can't presume to know the myriad factors of a stranger for sure. But if I were to pick a variable that might end up mattering, you could imagine. Here's a thing that I've seen quite often. Somebody wants a very stable, reliable, loving, attentive, romantic partner. Then they're 2 months into dating somebody, and that person says, I really enjoy spending time with you. I really could envision a future with you. And I'm so happy with the things that are happening between us. That same the recipient of that may, air quotes, get the ick in that moment.
Uh-huh.
And be like, well, now they're needy. Or something of that nature, or I don't want them to get dependent on me, or something of that nature. So there's this embedded idea that I want reliability and closeness. I want that kind of consistency and care and affection, but that I should respond to my own emotionality with knee-jerk reactions, so that if that comes to me and I feel weird about it, I will blame them and run away. And then we're sitting there constantly wondering why on earth we don't have somebody that's consistent and reliable. The trick of that, by the way, getting into some of the attachment and relationship stuff, is that a safe and reliable person is generally going to calm your nervous system, whereas a unreliable person, especially if they happen to be attractive, is going to activate your nervous system and then periodically calm it, which ends up being kind of a roller coaster of a ride, and also deeply tied to what we understand to be heavily related to overall attraction. So there's this like drive. And what I often find there is the embedded assumption I should follow my feelings.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that person coming to that fork in the road. Should I follow my feelings or should I follow my logic? They're always going to follow their feelings. They just might find a bunch of different creative ways to follow their feelings. What they won't do is follow their logic. This person's consistent and reliable. They offer all the things that I say I value in a relationship. We have had good, happy times together. I'm just activated right now because this is unfamiliar and uncomfortable, and I'm uncertain, and I don't know if I should trust it, and on and on and on. It's giving them a lot of power. So they'll frequently turn toward following their feelings. And they can find 25 different ways of following their feelings, but they're still following their feelings.
Yeah. So it's like, I feel uncomfortable right now. So that must mean that this relationship isn't right for me. So I'm going to leave it.
Which is just emotionally reactive.
Yeah. And therefore sabotaging the relationship.
Simple irony.
Yeah. The last thought I had on this, I'm going to use like an acting example of self-sabotage. It's like, if I maybe auditioning for this particular role would be really out of my comfort zone, and it would really be vulnerable for me to put myself out there like that and to care and to invest in this. And it would really hurt if I didn't get it. So I'm just not going to even audition in the first place. I'm not even going to do it. I'm going to protect myself from that potential devastation and hurt from putting myself out there and really wanting it and not getting it. So I'm not going to even do it in the first place. I'm going to quit before I'm even ahead, so then I can't even, get hurt. But you're sabotaging yourself then, because you really did want to try out for that thing, and you didn't do it to protect yourself, in air quotes.
With
But
the
yeah,
embedded assumption that I shouldn't feel bad. I shouldn't feel uncomfortable.
right. So yeah, that's where I see people sabotage themselves. It's like, well, if I don't even care about the thing, if I don't even do it, then I can't get hurt. All right. So that's the 7 things. What do you think?
Yeah. So I think that these are interesting topics overall, and I would say they cover somewhere between 12 and 100% of all therapy.
We have not done the research, so we can't say for sure. But it's somewhere in there. Yeah, I think a lot of stuff, sure. Typical conversations in therapy. I think there's a lot of other stuff too, though, that like wasn't talked about. And I don't know, it's hard to boil it down to those 7 things. And he kind of like saves himself and gives him the caveat that it's only 80% of therapy. So we can't.
Which, as I said, was the part of this that I honestly, I don't have that much beef with. We're just saying like the majority.
Yeah.
Honestly, I can't remember which one it was. It was like number 5 that was like setting boundaries and relating to your own emotionality. It's like,
Well,
yeah, that's it. Yeah. So
Oh yeah.
100%.
Well, I thought that was really interesting to go through, and I hope all you listeners enjoyed it too. We have a new quote on the board. Bravery is not a lack of fear. It is acting in spite of fear. Sorry, my eyesight is so bad. This reminds me of something Taylor Swift said. I'm gonna take every opportunity to relate what we're talking about to Taylor Swift. I hope you know. But when her Fearless album came out many years ago, she said something like, "Oh, being fearless isn't the absence of fear. It's having fears but jumping anyway," which I don't know if that's actually true, because I think the definition of fearless is actually the absence of fear.
But this one might work a little better.
But that works better. Bravery.
Yeah.
Yes, bravery is not the lack of fear. It's acting in spite of fear. I think that probably works a little better. Sorry, Taylor. But yeah, I think again, it makes me think of this idea of like clients being like, okay, I'll do the thing when I feel ready or when I don't feel afraid of it anymore. I'll do the thing when like the fear has dissipated and I feel confident. And it's like if you wait until you don't have any sort of fear in doing something, especially it's something that's like really out of your comfort zone, but is really important for you, then you may never do the thing, because there's always going to be a little bit of fear there, I think. So like, do the thing.
Absolutely. In men's group, we have a quote that we use quite often. I guess we haven't in a while, but do it a little before you're ready.
Yes. Because otherwise you'll never do it, because you'll never be fully ready.
Well, and there is this other kind of psychology that is, or this kind of mentality, if you will, that is something along the lines of like, I will do all of this psychological work in advance to like pre-process everything that might need to be done in order to then act, when we actually probably need to practice the acting and practice doing the thing while we are experiencing all of those feelings. That's the way to actually work through it. And we were talking about that on a past podcast episode. It's like you don't work through a spider phobia with no spiders in the room.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. I don't know why I'm thinking about parenting again, but if you ask like any parents, it's like, oh, like, how did you know like you were like fully ready to be a parent, and did you have all your ducks in a row? It's like, no, like I'm still not ready, but I'm doing it. We're here.
Yeah.
I still have fear. If everyone waited until they had no fear about having a child and being a parent, then nobody would be a parent, because
fear is not a what word do I want here? Fear is not an impediment to effective action, but inaction might impede you from pursuing your goals. It will impede you from pursuing your goals.
Yeah. So be brave, have some fear, and do the thing anyway. Do it before you're ready.
Yeah.
I really loved this conversation with you today, Adam. As always, if you're interested in our services, head on over to delvepsych.com. That's DELVEPSYCH.com. And you can have a free consultation call. Head on over to our Substack. We talk about really interesting topics, just like the ones we talked about today, on over at delvepsych.substack.com. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.